I love emulation. As someone who really enjoys gaming, I think emulation is genuinely one of the best things that has happened to gaming. The fact that we can still play old games from older generations and older consoles without actually needing to keep those consoles hooked up, as well as being able to enhance the games with higher resolutions, patches, and all that other stuff, I think has done some really good in the gaming space. Now, obviously emulators are constantly being developed, and as new consoles come out, that also means eventually, over time, new emulators for those consoles will come out. Now, as it stands right now, the most up-to-date and usable emulators are for the 7th console generation, which is the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. In particular, the Xbox 360 emulator that's currently going around Xenia is still a little bit rough around the edges. It can't quite play everything. Performance can still vary a lot depending on the title. The same is also true for RPCS3, which is the PlayStation 3 emulator, but I think that one overall, especially in terms of usability, is a lot more solid. But we can already look a little bit into the future and see what the progress is currently like for 8th gen console emulation. Now, this is something that I think is a little bit less exciting than emulation for older consoles. I think especially, let's say for example with the PlayStation 2, emulating that one is just much better of an experience because the hardware and the gaming experience overall has changed quite a lot, going from the PlayStation 2 to what we have these days on modern PCs. Like, we're talking about resolution, frame rate, texture quality, all these kinds of things. And with emulation, you can bump all of these things up. So for example, with regular emulators, you can usually, increase the internal resolution so that the game actually runs at the same resolution that your monitor is capable of, or even higher, so that you actually get the effect of super sampling. There are various patches out there that can actually increase the frame rate of certain games, from often taking them from 30 FPS to 60 FPS. But also, a lot of emulators these days support texture replacements. So the community can actually come up with texture packs that can actually bring the texture quality of those games to a much higher definition, basically. And so if we look more towards the 8th console generation, I think the necessity for those consoles to be emulatable is not as high, because I think, as time went on, the gap has basically shrunken more and more. And I think especially the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One era of games has aged extremely well. And I think there's almost no games from that era that I would consider just not holding up to modern standards. You can hook these consoles up to a modern TV and they will look and play perfectly fine. So emulating these consoles in that regard is not super, like, you're not gonna get this like wow effect, basically, like where you're really upgrading these games to a completely new level. There's also the fact that there's just less games on these platforms that are quote-unquote worth emulating. So back in the day, during the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2, a game getting a native PC port was definitely more rare, and if there was one, there's a good chance that it was usually pretty bad. But I would say with the 8th console generation, not only did exclusive titles slowly start to fizzle out, or at least become very rare, but also the games that do have native PC ports play perfectly fine even to this day and require no further tinkering. So once again, like, the necessity for emulation of a PlayStation 4 game or of an Xbox One game is a little bit less than for the older generations. However, I think it still is important in some way, because it actually helps preserve the catalog that these consoles had, especially because there are still some exclusive titles that are worth playing very much, and playing them on PC in like higher fidelity, even if it is just like a minor upgrade, is still at the very worst more convenient. Like, at best, it's obviously like a much better experience, but even if anything, it's just going to be a little bit more convenient going forwards to not constantly have to hook up a console somewhere just to have everything on one platform, which is PC. And in this video, I wanted to do a progress report, so to say, on the current state of PlayStation 4 and Xbox One emulation, looking at 4 games, racing games in particular, just to see where things are currently at. Now, between these 4 games that I picked out, one game really stands out among all the others as having the most amount of progress done by far. And most of that progress has actually been done in like the last month or two, so this is all very new. So what you are looking at right now is Driveclub. Now, Driveclub was definitely one of those titles that I think over time started to gain a lot more appreciation. I remember when it came out, it wasn't really as beloved because the content offering was fairly slim, was kind of buggy, but I think over time the developers really locked the fuck in and actually made this a really fun game over time, especially with all the content updates. And that's kind of the thing about this game. So you can actually still get this game physically, and if you have a PlayStation 4 or 5, you can still play this game, but you will only get the base content of the game. So this game has received so many content updates over its life cycle. We're talking events, we're talking tracks, we're talking cars, we're talking even the addition of bikes. So I think the DLCs have really expanded this game to something that is extremely worth playing. And you just cannot get this experience anymore if you did not get these DLCs back then. Now, with Emulation, although we can discuss the legality about getting the DLCs these days, it is abandonware, so, you know, it's more of a gray area, really. But with Emulation, you can actually still get access to these DLCs and to the content that is actually in this game. And I think this is actually the main reason why Driveclub in particular has had the most amount of progress done in terms of Emulation, because it is pretty much the only PlayStation 4 exclusive racing game that is really stuck on the PlayStation 4, where most people just will not ever see most of its content offering. And as we can see here, the Emulation is already really good. So we're actually already seeing a 60 FPS patch that has been made. The game is not actually hitting 60 FPS. It's currently, you can see it over here, I think it's topping out at 50 FPS. But it is still an improvement. Like, I think already being able to run the game at over 30 FPS, which is also like another thing, this game was only ever running on 30 FPS. Even if you try to play this game on a PlayStation 5, even a PlayStation 5 Pro, Sony has made no improvements to this game whatsoever. So you will always get the base, or the same experience as on a base PlayStation 4, basically. And so, yeah, this is actually looking really good. So you can actually uncap, or not fully uncap, but you can actually increase the frame rate. And I gotta say, the game looks great. Like, as far as I can see, there are no visible visual glitches, which have been there before when they started working on Driveclub a little bit more. For a while, you could only really play the races at night, because anything during the day just didn't really look good. But looking at this, this looks fantastic. The only thing that I am noticing here is that the motion blur effect seems to be broken. It might be that the 60 FPS patch just outright disables it. I actually think the motion blur looked really good in this game, and really helped this game still feel really good despite the 30 FPS. So I would actually, like, if I were to play this on emulator, I would actually prefer this. But as things stand right now on ShadPS4, this game seems to be really playable. Keep in mind, you're only seeing the game being played during a race. So there are still some issues with the menus themselves. They can at times only run at 1 FPS, or they might not work at all. So it is still far from actually playable if you actually want to, like, sit down and play through the entirety of this game because you missed it. I think it's still a little bit early for that, but this is actually extremely promising, and I would say give it a few more weeks, probably a few more months, and this could actually become a really playable experience once they actually fix the menus. And hopefully also optimize the game so that it actually is hitting 60 FPS. You can see in the video here, this is not actually a limitation of the hardware. Like, this guy is running on a 3080 and a 9800 X3D. So the hardware is definitely not the bottleneck here. It's just the optimization of the actual game itself, and the emulator needs to still be a little bit better for this to become like a more fluid experience. So it's actually constantly hitting 60. But regardless, this is actually super promising. And here's another really cool tidbit, and this is also like one thing that I really love about emulation in general, is that you can actually apply different aspect ratios. And this really surprised me. So for example, here we have an ultra-wide patch for Driveclub. I'm not sure if any emulated games that I ever played had any ultra-wide patches. This is actually more of a rarity, so to actually see this in action is really surprising. Now, obviously, this only matters if you're one of the, like, 1% who has an ultra-wide monitor, but at the same time, there are probably people out there who would, for example, play this game on a Steam Deck, which has a 16:10 aspect ratio, or maybe on monitors that have a different aspect ratio altogether. And just the fact that it seems like you can adjust this later down the road with, you know, community-made patches is really cool. It's something I didn't really expect to see, and as a certified ultra-wide enjoyer, I gotta be honest, racing games benefit among the most of all genres from the ultra-wide aspect ratio, because it actually makes the sense of speed feel much better. So to see this is absolutely such a treat. I didn't think this would ever be possible, especially not this early on, with emulation still being developed for this game. But yeah, this is super cool. Ultra-wide. And yeah, just to show you again how this current emulation stacks up to how the experience would be on a PlayStation 5 Pro, which, as I said earlier, is not that different from the base experience you got from Driveclub on a regular PlayStation 4. So this right now is running on the ShadPS4 emulator, and this is on the PlayStation 5 Pro. And honestly, it does not look that different. Once again, the main thing that I noticed, obviously, and you probably noticed as well, as one that I talked about earlier, is the motion blur effect. Once again, this might be because they disabled this in a patch. I haven't been able to test this myself yet. But once again, like as I said earlier, I think the motion blur does actually a lot of sense of speed to the game here. But other than that, it's pretty much spotless. If we go back to the ShadPS4 gameplay, like the shaders work. You can obviously see the frame rate is way higher here. It's almost spotless. Like once they're actually in the race, it seems to really just work. It's now just a matter of optimization and getting the menus to work. Now earlier I was also talking about different aspect ratios that you can use with patches on Driveclub, and I brought up the Steam Deck. Now that obviously begs the question if this game is even playable on Steam Deck. And the answer is not really, to no one's surprise. So if as you saw earlier, like a 3080 and like a super beefy CPU is still not even hitting the 60 FPS cap. So it's obviously unsurprising that the Steam Deck is currently not really able to properly run the game. Funnily enough, I actually think the frame rate is okay. It's more that the game is slowing down. Like the game is not running at full speed. And it's kind of hard to tell because he's just recording his screen with a phone or whatever. But it also looks like visually there might also be some glitches. But something about this does not look 100% right to me. Maybe he actually also decreased the internal resolution. This might also be why it kind of looks a little weird. But as it stands right now, it runs on Steam Deck, which is good news. It just doesn't run super well. And I'm not sure if better optimization would make this game playable at all on this emulator, because the Steam Deck is already kind of struggling with PlayStation 3 emulation. With PlayStation 3 emulation, it really depends what kind of game you're trying to play on the Steam Deck. There are games that you can actually just play flawlessly on the Steam Deck, but there's also games that struggle really hard. And it doesn't really surprise me that PS4 emulation is kind of pushing it a little bit too hard, but we don't know how optimization will look like in a year from now, so there's something that I think if you're interested in, you should at least keep an eye on. And yeah, that pretty much covers everything about Driveclub. This was definitely the most ambitious and also the most advanced emulation we've seen so far, and we will also see throughout this video. And yeah, it really seems like the game is getting very close to playable. I think it's really just a matter of time at this point. Or rather, it's not a question of if this game will be playable on PC with an emulator anymore. It's more a question of when and how much longer is it going to take. And I think I would definitely say by the end of the year, at the very latest, you can probably already enjoy this game on the ShadPS4 emulator, which would make me really happy, because right now, or at least so far, for the most part, the ShadPS4 emulator was really more of a Bloodborne emulator. It was really like the main thing that worked on this emulator. So to see that, you know, Driveclub, that Driveclub in particular is now getting so much attention is awesome to see. I did mention the DLCs earlier in the video. At the moment, I do not know if the ShadPS4 emulator even has support to install DLCs digitally, basically, onto the emulator. That's obviously the kind of important thing. The base experience, you can get that on a PlayStation 4. In fact, you can actually also, if you have a jailbroken PlayStation 5, you can actually also increase the frame rate of Driveclub that way. I'm not sure if you will actually be able to hit the 60 FPS target flat out, but obviously it's just not a great option having to jailbreak a new system like this. And to just have like emulation do the job is just the better option out of the two. However, Driveclub is obviously not the only exclusive racing game to the PlayStation 4. We got 2 more games here, and unfortunately, this is looking a little bit worse. Gran Turismo Sport was also an exclusive title to the PlayStation 4. I think this game is also playable on a PlayStation 5. It obviously begs the question why you would even emulate this game these days. I think there are some reasons, but they're not as strong as with Driveclub. With Driveclub, it was really more about the DLCs and also increasing the frame rate, maybe changing the aspect ratio. Now with Gran Turismo Sport, it's a little bit harder to justify. I think emulating Gran Turismo Sport is more for people who don't have a PlayStation anymore and want to play this. But unfortunately, as you can see, as soon as you get into the main menu, the game freaks out and crashes. So there is no progress here, at least so far. And unsurprisingly, the same is also true for Gran Turismo 7. It's basically the same thing. Like, you can boot the game, which honestly, like, in of itself is already huge news. The fact that you can boot the game, you can, you know, see all of these menus. Like, this already requires a tremendous amount of work that I think people don't really realize. Getting into the game is obviously, like, a different story. But yeah, I mean, you can get in. The intro menus lag a little bit. You can get past the first couple screens, but I think fairly shortly after that, the game will also crash. Yes, unsurprisingly. Now, once again, I think emulating Gran Turismo Sport and Gran Turismo 7 is a little bit less desirable, especially because these games really live off of their online content, especially the liveries that people made so that you can actually apply them and use them. Gran Turismo Sport has an offline mode and it also has like a separate career mode that I actually think is worth playing, even if it isn't as advanced or as interesting as the career mode from older Gran Turismo games. By the end of the day, it's still nice to see these games preserved in some way. And the thing is, you never know. You never know what direction they're going to be pushing this emulator. Maybe at some point they're going to restore the online modes. We've seen this with plenty of other emulators, actually, that they were able to re-implement online functions, and you could actually play with people who are also playing on an emulator. We could just as well see something like this for this emulator here as well. Although I do think this is still going to take a lot of time to get implemented. I wouldn't expect this anytime soon. But who knows? Gran Turismo Sport might still be in the cards for a worthwhile experience on this emulator. But as of right now, as you can see, they're obviously not working. But what about the Xbox One? Since obviously the PlayStation 4 wasn't the only racing game with exclusive racing games. In fact, I would argue that the Xbox One has a more attractive lineup of racing games in general. In fact, I remember back then I had to decide between a PlayStation 4 and an Xbox One. My parents only let me get one. And I do remember deciding for the Xbox One for Forza Horizon 2 in particular. And this is obviously where things get interesting. So this is Forza Horizon 2 running on it's not even an emulator, we'll get to that later. Running on XWine1. So this is currently still a private project. This is not something you can download and try out yourself. But this is it running on it. And it's not perfect. But it looks, I mean, you're in the game. And in fact, if you can notice it, the frame rate has also been increased here. Like, once again, just like with Driveclub, this game was also kept to 30 FPS. And already we can see this game running at higher frame rates. And I think this is actually one of the games that I think would benefit from it the most. Pretty much every single Forza Horizon game is playable at higher frame rates than 30, except for this one. This is really the only Horizon game that is still locked to 30 FPS. Now, there's clearly still some issues with the shaders, with the shadows, and pretty much everything. Like, there's still visual issues here. The frame rate is also not running 100% smoothly yet. You can notice like a bunch of stuttering here. But the fact that you already can get into the game, you can actually play this this far, like this is already after the introduction, is great news. And fun fact, this gameplay is also fairly old at this point. This was the last update we got on Forza Horizon 2. And this is a gameplay video from February, so as I said, this is a private project. This is not something you can just download at the moment. So who knows where the progress is currently. But yeah, this is something I'm actually also really, really excited about, because Horizon 2 was actually a game that I spent a lot of time on, and I could really tell that the Xbox One was kind of holding it back. So the game looks amazing on an Xbox One, but it's just the 30 FPS cap that's really, really kind of bottlenecking this game, so to say. So to see this running at 60 would be a treat. I'm not sure if we're gonna see the same kind of aspect ratio tweaks that we saw on Driveclub. Probably. So one thing to understand about XWine1, which is what this is running on, is that this is not strictly an emulator. This is what's called a translation layer, actually. For the ease of discussion, I'm probably just gonna still keep talking about this emulator. It's just like the word that people use to, you know, consoles basically being played in some kind of way or used in some kind of way on PC. What makes the difference here is that the Xbox One is basically the first Xbox console that was, in essence, basically a Windows PC in some kind of way. Like, the inner architecture was very, very similar to just a regular desktop PC, which is why this is a translation layer, because it doesn't actually need to emulate any infrastructure from the actual system. It can actually just run under the same one. It just has to translate the calls and the code and everything. But yeah, getting back to Horizon 2, this is definitely something that I hope we get some more info on, because I would love to play this game on an emulator. There you go, I used the word emulator. But yeah, as of now, there's no info. Please do not harass or annoy the people that are working on this to release anything. I think they're trying their best to just get like a base level of games working before they put it out there. And until then, I think we should remain a little bit more patient. But obviously, outside of Horizon 2, there are also other Forza games. In fact, there were a bunch of them. So you could play Horizon 3 and Horizon 4 on the Xbox One, as well as Forza Motorsport 5, 6, and 7. So that's 6 Forza games in total for one console. Once again, like, since this is a private emulator, we don't have access to as much info. It's not that people can just download it and run their own benchmarks. All of this is coming from the actual people that are running this emulator and are working on this emulator. And we do have a small update on how things are looking for Forza Motorsport 5. So you can see the game boots, just like Gran Turismo. So at least we got to that point. The menus are all working. But unlike with Gran Turismo Sport and 7, you can actually get into the game. Now, this runs like absolute dog water. We don't need to talk about that. However, I do think that, ironically enough, and this is just my inexperienced opinion on this might be completely wrong, but to me, it seems like this is actually progressed way, 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 way further. And it's for the simple fact that, okay, I was about to say it's for the simple fact that there aren't as many visual glitches still. Like, as you could see from Forza Horizon 2 earlier, there were still some issues with the shaders and the shadows. Looking at this looks flawless. This looks absolutely spotless. This is exactly how I remember the game looking. Now, earlier when he switched to the exterior cam, we could see that I assume this is the motion blur that is kind of broken at the moment. But at least from the interior cam, this looks perfect. I see absolutely nothing that looks out of place here. Now, it might be that this is kind of the only track that works. It might be that there are still some issues with certain weather conditions or lighting conditions or whatever. But looking at this gameplay, this looks great. The only problem here is the frame rate. Actually, it seems to stabilize a little bit. Okay, it seems to stabilize if there's not much in view. So what this looks like to me is just a matter of optimization at this point. Now, this obviously begs the question, is this even a game you want to play on an emulator? Is this even a game you want to get back on? If there are other Forza games, especially Forza Motorsport 6 in particular, is usually lauded as a better version of this game. And I would say yes. I think all of these Forza games, even if they aren't amazing, and even if they are maybe a little bit interchangeable amongst each other, I think are still worth playing. I remember in particular Forza Motorsport 5 had a really interesting visual treatment. Like, it's hard to explain, but the way the tracks looked and the way the game looked in general, it had a very, very certain look to it that I don't think has been really replicated. All of these Forza games also have a slightly different career structure. It's never anything super crazy, but I do think it is worth playing. I think this was still a game that, for the few hours that I did play it, I at least enjoyed somewhat. It does get boring fairly quickly, and the content is also, you know, it's fairly slim. Even if you do manage to get the DLCs and updates installed from later points in the game, I think it's still fairly limited what you can do in this game. And once again, obviously not having any of the online functions working, at least at the moment. But I think when it comes to emulation and everything in general, it's more a matter of preservation to me. What matters more to me is that these games are actually still able to be played on a system that doesn't require the console that they released on, because PC is kind of like an eternal platform, if you will. It's like the one platform that will always exist, right? Consoles come and go. There's a new console generation every like 6 to 8 years. But PCs are always around and will always be around. And so if a game works on PC, that inevitably means that the game will work forever, right? Also, here's one thing that I almost forgot to throw in, but this is also Motorsport 5 on the left and Horizon 2. Both also running on Steam Deck, since we talked about the Steam Deck earlier when looking at Driveclub. Now, honestly, the performance here seems to be at least a little bit better. So the frame graph here is freaking out a lot, which is telling me that there's a bunch of stuttering. However, if you look at the base frame rate, it's actually not looking too bad. Once again, I think these games also look pretty fine. This was actually the actual last update we got on both of these games. And once again, Motorsport 5 looks spotless. He's obviously standing here, so the motion blur issue we saw from earlier is probably just not applied here. But Motorsport 5 looks amazing, even on the Steam Deck. This looks super legit, and honestly, it looks like witchcraft. Like, as someone who played these games like roughly like 10 years ago on a console, to see these running on a handheld feels like absolute witchcraft, honestly. But once again, like, the frame rate here is not looking too bad. So we're getting roughly over 30 FPS on Motorsport 5. Now, this game did run on 60 FPS by default. However, I would say if you would have to make certain compromises to play these games on a Steam Deck, I think 30 FPS is okay. I think I could deal with 30 FPS on a handheld device as long as the frame rate is stable and we don't have this like crazy frame graph here that's going all over the place. Now, Horizon 2, you know, once again, you can notice that the shadows look a little bit weird. Performance isn't looking as good. So we're running at 22 FPS. You gotta also remember that there's nothing going on here currently. So in the example of Forza Motorsport 5, he's currently looking at what's essentially like the track boundary. There's nothing there. I would imagine if you have the camera pointed more towards the rest of the track with other opponents in view, the frame rate is probably gonna tank also into the 20s. Same here. There's not really that much in view. I think if you are in a race with other NPCs, it's probably gonna tank below 20 FPS. But it is still promising. It's nice to see these games also run on a Steam Deck, in particular for Linux support, right? Like, there's also people that just play on Linux, and so this is just a nice way to tell them, like, hey, you can use this emulator too. But yeah, I think that covers the state of PlayStation 4 and Xbox One emulation. This is easily the most exciting thing in gaming for me at the moment, or at least among the most exciting thing in gaming at the moment. Once again, there's not really a huge amount of games that I think really benefit a lot from emulation, but the few games we have, like Driveclub and Horizon 2, in particular, these two I think could really see a resurgence, basically, if they become super playable on emulator, because this is basically the amazing thing about emulation. It's brought so many games back into the public conscious, and I think there's a lot of games from the last couple of years that would be nowhere near as relevant as they are today without emulation. And I think likewise we can see a massive resurgence for the likes of Driveclub and Horizon 2 once emulation actually gets to a point where anyone can just get it set up and it runs and it works and you can have fun with it. And that is something I'm really, really excited for. But that's about it from me for today. Now, tell me which games you are actually looking forward to, since I only covered 4 games here in this video. Are there any other games that you are looking forward to playing on an emulator for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One? I'd really like to hear from you, because there's always new games where I'm like, ooh, this would be kind of cool, this would be kind of nice. So if you can come up with anything, tell me about it. But yeah, that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, take it easy, and as always, peace. See you guys.